We are back for another episode, and at the time of year where we're all distracted by watching softball in the background. So if you see our heads on the swivel, we are checking in on conference play right now has begun. It is that
I was going to say, what time of year is that? February through June?
Seriously. Yes.
Seriously.
There's a little in the middle where we maybe aren't quite as distracted, but back into action. I've got to get my TV set up so I can watch all of the games. But I do like the time of year where the games start at 8 a.m.
I sat down, I was like, 10 o'clock softball today.
Yeah.
This is fantastic.
Right. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Now the SEC has 42 teams in it, and the tournament starts on Tuesday or whatever. So
yeah,
so that's fun. But yeah, it's a good time of year. But that's not what we're going to talk about. Today we are going to talk about a concept that Laura is actually wrote a blog, and that's going to be released soon. This concept of movement variability and kind of what we're going for as far as movement when we're training skill acquisition, whether you're training pitching, hitting. So Laura, I'm just gonna kick it to you to maybe give not all the details. Everyone can go read the blog if you want all the details, but give just a little overarching summary of kind of the core concepts, and then we can kind of kick off from there of how our training might be informed by that, or different things that we see.
Yeah. This is a topic I'll say is, it doesn't get a ton of attention in research. I think it's difficult to quantify when we talk about how variable someone's movement is, meaning the, degrees of which we can measure are pretty small. And so deciding what variations in a movement pattern are appropriate and healthy is tricky. But this is a topic that I think, both from a training standpoint and also when we talk about comparing biomechanics and patterns and swings and pitching patterns over time is something that we need to talk about. We've sort of, and this is not even specific to softball. This is really rooted in just our perceptions of what we understood about the brain and the way in which we sort of, produce our movement. And so for a very, very long time, the presumption was just kind of we get experience and exposure to a movement, not even something sport specific, but just in our environment. And our brain's all right, let me just kind of tuck that back like a cassette tape that I can pull out and put in when I need it. And for a long time, that's how we coached. It's where this concept of ideal mechanics and coaching to some level of, a very rigid mindset of these are the patterns you have to have. That's where that came from, because the presumption then was if you pick the wrong cassette tape, that's your fault, right? And so a lot of training revolved around essentially putting in the right cassette tape, right? The right movement pattern, the right, ideal movement pattern. And honestly, it really wasn't until the 60s until we had some text that was translated out of Russian to tell us that there's a lot of variability in the way humans move. It was a pretty novel concept at the time, and I'm saying it was only the 1960s, but the concept that elite athletes, elite performers, people who do repetitive movements don't actually repeat their movements the same every time. And that's pretty critical. I think in our sport, hitting introduces sort of natural variability because you've got a ball that moves. Pitching does not. Pitching has so long been rooted in this, you have this pattern and this is what you have to repeat. And if you don't repeat that pattern, you've somehow made an error. It's somehow wrong. And we sort of said that very rigid, repeatable mechanics are the goal. And I'll say between the, this sort of collision of biomechanics and motor control, it doesn't operate like that. And we've got research in areas of the body of running and heart rate variability and places where the human body actually really likes variability. We need variability. When we're at either opposite ends of the spectrum, when something is too invariant, we don't fluctuate, we don't change our blood pressure when we need, or something is way too variable. I'm going to use arrhythmia, just keeping with the heart example. Those extremes are bad, right? So we are always trying to live in some bandwidth where we are, maybe a little less invariant, more variable. It's a continuum. It's not this, you have your patterns and this is what you have to do every time. The concept that I think really applies, and I think this is particular to pitchers in our world, is the kind of this injury resilience that develops because of movement variability. So when we talk about, how do we keep pitchers healthy? How do we keep athletes healthy? those very rigid mechanics that are just the same thing over and over again, particularly if they're inefficient, even with elite athletes with great compensations, they can have some, risk of injury, is that we want the body to keep solving problems. That's how it builds its resilience. And so the applications, not just to training, obviously, it ties so much into, our long bats, short bats, plyos, and the way we introduce that problem solving. But it is really, to me, it's the most important aspect of it, besides its performance implications, is helping your body just to be resilient, to solve these problems. I always talk about strength and conditioning is solving movement problems just at a lower intensity than what we do in the sport. And those types of problems are really critical. It's not just strength and conditioning equals reducing injury risk. It's the concept that the body is put through these problems to solve ranges of motion, speeds of movement, that really let it say, okay, I'm fatigued, so I can't tap into my normal strategy or my typical strategy. And so I have a solution or set of solutions that I can adjust. And I think we see this, I think, across the board over, the course of a season, over the course of a training year, where patterns change. That's what we do. Humans adapt. We change what we do in variation. And so to assume that doesn't happen, in sport, it misses a huge opportunity, I think, to develop this resilience to repetitive motion. And pitching is, definitely a great example of that. And there's kind of two pieces. There's the problem solving. There's the sort of motor control and motor planning aspect of it, of being able to adapt and adjust to, pressure. We're now in conference tournaments, to weather, to fatigue. But there's also this concept of like, if the goal is just to repeat something over and over again, you are going to place stress on tissues that at a certain point, they're not going to be able to respond. And so that variability of movement kind of shares the stress a little bit across the body, and it helps in that problem solving to figure out what are these solutions that an athlete has that not only allows them to have performance and adapt and on the fly, but also spreads that stress around and allows those tissues or those areas, especially some hot spots in pitchers, to have an opportunity to remodel, to come back, to not be sort of wore down by this same pattern over and over and over again. That's kind of the general premise. Is it's not about we pick the cassette tape and it's this one-way conversation. Variability is a really, really important byproduct. It's a healthy byproduct of human movement. And I think, in my very biased opinion, softball pitching is it's one of the best examples. It's so complicated. It's high intensity. It's high velocity. I say with a ton of bias as a former pitcher, but it just seems like such a great application of this variability concept to movements that are that quick, because oftentimes it had been applied to like running and cycling and these really kind of like low energy state repetitive movements. And I think the application up the chain to something a little higher velocity is really, really important, because the energy that pitchers produce, the positions they put their bodies in, the volume that they throw, injury resilience is, in my opinion, it's one of the biggest things you have to chase as a pitcher right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I think about this concept, one of the like negative descriptions that will often give hitters when they come in for their assessment is that they're very rigid. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about that concept before. And so some of that concept is not really exactly what we're applying here, which is there's a concept of rigidity that we talk about where when an athlete does have a lot of variation because they are struggling with stability. So young athletes, that they get rigid in their limbs, and hitting, they'll kind of lock out their upper body a lot of times in different ways. And pitching, they'll have a very stiff arm action. And so that's not exactly what we're talking about here, because that rigidity actually comes from a level of variability that is too much because that athlete is lacking stability. So a level of sort of like core variability, if you will. But there are older athletes we have who that's not what we're saying when we're talking about rigidity. And really often in hitting, what it looks like is an athlete who has only trained in front toss. So a very sort of like one specific skill that they've done that is repeated over and over and over without very much variability because of the sort of context to it. And what you see from that athlete is that then they've learned this sort of one movement solution. They cannot tap into a level of variability that actually is needed in the skill to be successful. Hitting, I think, is a little simpler to like grasp this concept because of course you have to be variable, like almost the idea that you aren't variable, although training sometimes still ignores that, but like you have to be variable because you're adjusting to timing, heights, pitch locations. Like that's in some ways obvious,
right?
But this idea that we can look at one video of someone doing front toss and say, we want you to literally look to the minute exactly the same every time, and that's what we're going for, is not a great concept for all the reasons that we know. The body needs to adjust. What happens if literally you step in a box that has mud in it and you're that rigid? That's when we're talking about, one, that might affect performance if you can't sort of tap into variability. Two, that is where some injuries come from, all the way down to different reasons for that. And so that's a phrase we use a lot in hitting, is like that, this athletes, sometimes they look powerful, they have high exit velocity. You're like, oh, this kid might be able to swing it. And when you watch front toss, you're like, because we've trained this one thing, and we've trained the skill to be repetitive. And especially when we train it that way, and they didn't get there from sort of like learning it, they get really stuck in that. And that's something that it's actually quite hard to break. And it just requires some like time and exposure to different movements to sort of like getting them outside of that one path that you have. But I don't know, maybe Ashley, I'll kick it to you, because I do think the concepts it's less obvious that you need some variability in pitching. I think because people think you're just trying to repeat that same thing over and over. And and we're not talking about like on one, your glove is in the air, and on the second, your glove is not in the air. Like we're not talking about that level of variability, but maybe just walk through kind of how you see this applying in pitching.
Yeah, I think the biggest concept here is to understand the relationship, and you touched on this a little bit already, Krista, but the relationship between stability and variability.
Right.
If you don't have a baseline and a foundation of stability, meaning literally stability in the body, the ability to stabilize through the center of the body, the ability to stabilize on a single leg. I mean, like these are the types of, you have to have a baseline of stability in order to tap into variability. And so that is so important to understand. So this is why all hitting and pitching lessons for younger kids, I shouldn't say all, but most of them are just brutal, because they're so unstable. They're not supposed to be stable yet. Their bodies they just keep growing. They're getting taller. Their weight is changing. It's just a constant, there's so much variability. They don't have stability yet. They don't have that opportunity. And so then we're asking them to do tasks that require variability, and they're variable. So what happens, Krista, is what you're referring to, right? So then we just try to like force the task to be stable to get some result. And then that ends up being a major problem. So that's how we see it in younger kids. And then for our older athletes, I think it's interesting. Like we see that we've talked about this in the podcast many times. The more games you play, the more fatigued you get, the more your stability goes down. And so like command is a number one thing to really suffer essentially when your stability goes down. And that is a representation of variability. So when someone is having trouble, like, oh, it's too many walks, too many hit by pitches, whatever that looks like, too many free passes, it's not that they need to work on like stability more, it's because it's not like, oh, they threw one ball and now we're like, nope, let's get it back. It's that when they threw a ball, they couldn't make an adjustment, right? And so that is so different. So at the base of why they can't tap into variability is likely a lack of stability in the body. Again, whether it's, these foundational movements of like core stability, single leg stability, etc. But variability typically comes from its arm action and in pitching, and it is specifically varying the relationship between arm and trunk. So we want, ideally, the trunk to be very stable and not make the motion look different every single time. That's just too much to navigate. And then you're only really creating variability based on things of where your body is that day, meaning your center of mass at deceleration, what the umpire's zone is, potentially if the ground is softer versus harder, it's turf, it's sand, it's dirt that's pretty compact, whatever that might be. And those are the external variables that you're trying to navigate. And then as the body starts to now be a little bit shakier. Now you have more like instability within the body. Maybe it's just because it's the 7th inning and you're tired. It's a tournament and it's the 3rd game of the day. Or maybe it's just it's the end of a season. Now you're negotiating this, like, where's my arm in relation to my trunk? Probably so much so that, again, this is where it's like, it's too many balls, right? And so I often think it's just important to understand we train a lot in pitching for variability, knowing how important it is. And this is where we are changing weights. We are changing tasks. We'll do things where we'll say like, okay, you're always going to throw a different weighted ball, but the target is stable. So different weight, stable target. Then you're going to go normal weight. So similar weight, constant target, constant weight, multiple target. And like, we're always embedding those types of concepts into training to make sure that we know how to do that at varying intensities, vary the task, vary what's going on in the arm, vary what's going on with the, what you're supposed to be executing. And then there comes a time where for many pitchers, their internal stability becomes so low where they literally can't do those things anymore and execute. And so I think that's really where this like threshold really, is established, and understanding, yes, I need variability. Here's what it actually means. Here's how I would train it and check it. But if I don't keep the underlying foundation in check, then I'm literally not going to have the option to do that. And so I just think that's very, very, very important. That's what you were trying to emphasize, Krista. It's not variability like the move is different every time. It has to come off of this like baseline of stability just outside the movement, outside the hitting the swing, outside the pitching motion. Just like, what is that baseline stability? And so then does the center of the body give you a constant to work off of or not? That's really the relationship that we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, and I think it's like, it is the idea of a movement solution, right? Because at the end of the day, elite athletes can work around varying things that happen. And there are things that, your body changes, the mound changes, the umpire zone changes, and you have to make some adjustment. And if what we see often is the sort of collision of the things that you are talking about, which is kind of what I was describing, which is an athlete without stability, because they shouldn't have stability, is then told and put into a system where they're like, this task needs to look identical every single time. And so not only is that not true in most cases, that the task literally looks that identical that we're talking about, where we should freeze frame people and make sure their, hands look the same and they're going to the same extension, and love you to death announcers, but like, let's stop using power V, please, in hitting. That literally makes no sense. But
what's
this
power
concept,
V? This
extension, like she really got through. It's like their version of extension, power V. Except when you watch hitting, like go watch 10 different clips of home runs at the collegiate level, and if it's an inside high pitch, they won't get to that. So is that wrong? Even though they hit a home run, anyways. Then that's what we're talking about, though. That's variability. That's right. Is that pitch, that the solution to hit that pitch fair as a home run required that athlete not to go to the power V movement. And that athlete has a level of variability where they can tap into that. And that is what variability looks like in hitting, is that sometimes to accomplish the task, you have to vary off of some sort of baseline.
Neutral.
And when I'm watching that hitter with my eyes over and over, I'm not going to be like, whoa, this person looks different every single time. Like most of the core things, as you're saying, Ashley, are going to look similar. If we did biomechanics on those every time, a lot of the core biomechanics pieces would stay in the normative ranges. We're not talking about varying like huge, massive amounts, but there will be some principles about how they accomplish that task that change significantly in order to accomplish it in a way they need to. So for pitchers, if that's hand release timing and different things like that to get strikes because their body has changed, because the umpire zone is requiring something, whatever that is, you'll see that variation. And what we see so often in this like idea is that we don't think, we literally don't acknowledge that variation exists. We try to teach the skill as though there is not that variation. And we get these athletes kind of stuck in not being able to vary in a way that actually elite athletes do. And as you said, Laura, and as the blog mentions, there's a variety of not good things about that, at its worst being injury, which is, you step wrong and you can't vary and your body can't adjust to it, or you're super fatigued and your body can't adjust to the change in body position or whatever those things are. And so the way that we manage this is, for the younger athletes that we do work with, which is not many, but our suggestion would be, for those who are working with younger athletes, is to create some stability through something like strength and conditioning. But in all their skill training, they should have a level of variability, of sort of allowing them to explore freedom, really, I think is even more important than variability, which is they don't have those things. And so this idea that you can put them in a box is really going to backfire for that athlete later. So let them, as they are gaining stability outside of the motion, have and be asked to tap into different things. So in pitching, that might be like throwing to different targets. Maybe you keep the same ball because of just where they are. For hitting, we do switch bats for younger athletes. We switch angles still. We do a lot of things where they're starting to explore at a level that they can still have success, how to have that variation. And then obviously, as our athletes are older, whether we're trying to break the rigidity or that we have a variability and we're trying to keep that variability and that allotment of movement solutions, I guess, the way that we train that is by, instead of sort of like putting them in a box, things that we've talked about, which is giving them some freedom, some constraints and some design around them to encourage a slightly more efficient way of doing things, but otherwise make sure that those limitations are not so narrow and so tight that they don't have the ability to have this variation and so to really tap into things. And honestly, I think in hitting, one of the things we've been doing lately is finding more and more ways to create variation, because, something that we've talked about in our department is like, even doing a drill like a certain amount of times in a row, you're starting to get them too stuck in something, and so really upping the variation, because we just see this so much where the ball goes up when they think it's going to go down and they don't have a solution to like solve that problem because we've gotten them very stuck in this one way of doing things. So I think that's kind of how we see this all playing out in things, and probably the research, in running makes a lot of sense, where like I'm going and I, obviously like I step on something a little different, or my body has to readjust. We have women, our body is changing, we have there's a lot of ACL stuff about this, this is related, which is our body literally changes during the month in different ways. And so if you can't tap into variation when your body is changing, that's not great. It's not great. And it has some not great results for injuries and things like that. So that's kind of how we see it. And I think it's so counter to how we teach things most of the time, which is like to try to put, athletes in this like,
well, Krista, I think
box.
all the time, like this is where the concept of like cycling environments is really, really a staple approach for us at OGX. So from a pitching side, if someone were to be at high intensity and when we get to them to, whatever their full distance is, we do have some athletes that maybe like 13 or something and could potentially be at 40 feet, right? So like 40 feet, 43 feet, whatever their full is, and they're going 100% intensity. If they do not, the task is, they are trying to practice for the task. So we can't just be like, oh, you threw 6 balls all over the place. Like, okay, good luck this weekend. I mean, we could, but that athlete's not feeling that great. And so the first thing that we do is like, and it's probably written in their program for them to do this anyway, but if it wasn't, we would recommend like, hey, go back to an X environment. So an example of what it might look like, especially for a younger athlete, they would throw plyos at different weights and have to hit a same target over and over so that they establish this realm of variability, but at low intensity, usually 50 to 75% intensity, because that's where we can provide the stability for them. Then they'll do the same thing where we then take a lower intensity, switch them to a softball. Hey, can you stabilize? Now, can you vary it a little bit when it's all under control? And how are you doing with that at high intensity? And at high intensity, it's not as good. And so we're like, okay, go back around, do that again, go cycle the plyos again. Now bring it up to a softball and be at low intensity and keep going from environment to environment. And this is how we get athletes to basically assess when they're at full intensity, full distance. How did I do with that execution? okay, this is what I didn't do well. Let me go re-navigate those concepts in an environment where I probably have more control, right? Or like where I can feel my body a little bit more. This is movement, creating the ability to have movement, so different movement solutions. This is how you teach things. And what I think is interesting is that whenever you comment on someone's patterns, like even if we have remote kids that sometimes will send like a video in, right? And you comment on something, they'll be like, do you have a drill for that? Even our athletes still say that a lot. And I always think that's interesting. So I'm like, okay, we just have to keep educating them. Do you have a drill? What we have done, definitely in hitting as well, but from a pitching standpoint, is like when you're not doing well at this part of the motion, go create a drill and then make it go. I mean, it's like absolute rigidity. It's not based in giving them movements, helping them find different movement solutions. It's not based in them having movement variability. It's literally now master the drill, as if mastering some drill is then going to move into the motion. If the motion is all about variability and all we try to do to fix patterns is to master these like drills that likely, another topic, don't even match the movements that are being asked of you in the actual motion. But that is not the track that we should be on. Instead, we want to get them to understand, like, no, go work through the full motion in a different environment, in a lower intensity, with a different ball type to help you understand. Then you internally can navigate that change. And that's ultimately what's going to translate.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, Laura.
I would say the thing I kind of wrote down just to make sure I mention is this, Krista, you talked about like younger athletes and not putting them into these like really rigid solutions. And, something I talk about with a lot of our parents, or I have, I'll have consulting calls with parents that are frustrated through, they maybe don't quite yet understand or appreciate what puberty does to kids, and especially young female athletes. And so what we see is this kind of unfortunate pairing up of, you've got puberty hitting, which is changing all of the parameters about the body, right? Length of limbs, weight, we talk about that a lot. And then you are also trying, in the midst of all of that chaos, that's already introducing natural variability into the motion. It's already doing that. Like I said, limbs are longer, heavier. Even if they're throwing the same weight of ball, their body is changing. That's already introducing chaos. And I'll say the typical approach is then let's just lock the motion down, right? Let's just either control the endpoint by hitting spots or breaking down drills, as you mentioned, Ash, like very rigid. And it's like puberty is already introduced the variability for you, and it's very hard. And I certainly respect the frustration that coaches and parents feel and the athletes feel about the navigating that transition. But then to say like, okay, you have this variability. We ultimately want to preserve it. We ultimately want your body to be able to navigate changes like this. To me, it's no different than you take that, that high school senior who's never lifted before, and you put her in a badass strength and conditioning program. Her body has changed. And so to adapt to that, then allowing her to adapt to it through puberty is what's going to preserve her ability to do that. And what we often do is say, nope, we're going to lock her down into this motion, this pattern. It has to look like this. And we're just going to say, well, if that endpoint is chaos, we're going to make the start point less chaos. And when that gets post puberty, it is stuck. It is so hard. You mentioned this, Krista. It is so hard to get kids out of patterns that have been just so ingrained on them because they never had the opportunity. It was too rigid to be able to control that variability that was introduced through puberty. And so I get it's frustrating, but it's a very, very important learning point for the body, especially in a movement that is so difficult to coordinate like the pitching motion.
Basically, drills are the worst. I hope this gets ripped out and put on social media because drills are the worst. And also that
broken down. Well, we do drills, but like broken down. Yeah.
No, the traditional, like, what's the drill to fix that? It's like I die a little every time someone asks that question. Also, that I was like, remember when I got asked to do a drills talk? That's at NSA or something. I was like, bummer. Because I'm the person that's like, drills are the worst. But basically this idea, of course we do drills, but in a way that they're centered around the athlete exploring movement and finding the solution on their own. That is not a drill.
In the
Right,
entirety
so-
of the pitching motion. That's the key part.
Right.
It's the entirety of the pitching motion.
Of the swing, the entirety of the pitching motion. Typically, it's in an environment where they can establish a little more control. And there's some training implement, a plyo, a long bat, a short bat, something, a weighted ball. There is some training implement that is allowing them to feel where they are, that's going to help them get into. We're not just like, go try it on your own and see if you can find the solution. We design an environment at a particular intensity. Maybe we manipulate how they're starting. Maybe we give them a certain bat or ball and it helps get them into that. And they're like, now I feel what it's supposed to be like, right? And so we say it's a drill because we don't want to scare people too much. That's not a drill.
Right.
That's it's
not a drill in the
design.
way. Yeah, it's not a drill in the way that you're thinking about it. I was
traditional drills, guys, they're the worst. And I just think like if you're listening to this seriously and you are a parent of an athlete that goes to lessons and they just do drills in a very traditional way. They take the motion as if it starts in a T, as if it starts in a K. You have to stop your swing at some point. Like, I hope you listen to this and are like, oh, damn. I mean, it's time to run because that is actively choosing to lower your athlete's ceiling in the long run. 100%. We're not like unsure about this. It is an active choice at that point to lower their ceiling in the long run for the sake of manipulating a training session and making it look like you're building a rock star. So it's time to start like understanding that concept for our own athletes. Stop asking what's the drill for that. It's already embedded in your program. And then for anyone outside of people who follow our programs, I think you have to start looking at how your coaches or instructors are trying to get your athlete to make change. Because if it's traditional drill, it ain't going to work.
I was having some PTSD from being a now sports mom of two kids who really, really don't take sports very seriously. So just full caveat, my kids are not going to be professional athletes one day, but they like to play. So we go and we're into things, as should be the case for a 9 and 7-year-old. But it's very hard. First of all, I always sit there and think like, no one knows that I like probably know the most about sports of any of the people here. Because I just sit in the corner and I don't say anything, and the people I just think this every time I'm there. I'm like, the soccer's medium. I'll say that. The soccer structure is medium. I feel like I could see how, from a developmental standpoint now, they only play on the weekend. The rec system we're in, they play one time on the weekend. They have one practice. The ratio seems fine. The kids are into it. Like, whatever. It seems fine. It's a smaller field. There are rules, whatever. The baseball system is, my parents were in town this weekend and I kept saying, this is actively destroying development. Like there was a kid, first of all, I helped coach in the Little League organization in our area last year. And my son was in 2nd grade last year. So whatever, 8U, I don't know what that would be, 7U, 8U. Technically. And it was supposed to be full kid pitch last year. And the coaches in our league all agreed that I've talked about this before, we were going to not do full kid pitch. We did some kid pitch and some coach pitch. And at the end of the year, the person in charge of the league was like, we're not as good as the other areas, so we need to start kid pitch earlier. And I was like, that is insane. Like, that is insane. These kids can't even pitch yet. And it's not fun. And the kids that can pitch then strike out everyone. And then you can't pitch the kids that can't pitch because they walk everyone. And so I was like, what if we do the machine? And he was like, well, that's just too easy. I'm like, what's happening? So anyways, this year my 7-year-old started playing and I walked up to the first game and it's full kid pitch in 1st grade. So in my son's very first at bat, he got nailed right in the head.
Yeah, it's like sending them in the Michelin Man suit.
Right. Then we get to a safety issue. Right.
But then there was a kid who threw hard because he's the big kid. And literally, I think maybe his dad was the coach, this was another kid. His dad was like, throw it slower. And I was like, what are we doing? We are actively telling the kid who throws hard to throw it slower because he's going to hurt someone because he's 7. Like, and then every single coach, dad, bless all of their hearts for volunteering, but they like, the kids come up because they're 7 and they're like, elbow up. So we shove them into some weird position. And I was just like, every ounce of this is literally when you know about development actively, like the good kid that throws hard, we're like, don't do that. The bad kid that's flimsy, we're like, try to get into this weird position. Like it's literally all of this. I'm just like, we have created an environment against any principle of player development or physical development. I was just like, this is tough. This is tough.
But at the end of the day, Krista, I'm gonna educate you as if you don't know anything and you're just a parent. It will be fine for your children as long as you don't take that concept and run with it. Now let's go to hitting lessons. As long as your kids do multiple sports,
right?
You are the source.
My kids aren't getting stuck in anything because they
absolutely not. Right. So that's
one time they're doing that skill the whole week.
Right. Exactly. So it's like if they are playing baseball, it's with you. It's with they're having freedom. Right. Then they're playing other sports. This is the concept of like kids should play multiple sports. Like no shit, we all know that. Right. It's just logistically, it's impossible. But the root of why kids should play multiple sports when they're young is exactly what you're talking about today, Laura. This is what they're trying to build. And so the reality is a sport like baseball and softball are too hard for kids who are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's not a sport for kids of that age.
At one point, my dear mother, who maybe she'll listen to this or maybe Paul will clip this and use it, was, they had a baseball, and I actually have a video of Teddy, my youngest, he was in right field the whole inning. I don't know if it was the whole inning, but most of the inning. He just ran in circles. And I just videoed him, and I would go, the game would be going, and then I would go back, and he was just running in circles. And my mom was like, he really needs to pay attention. And I said, he's getting in a booster seat after this, and I'm bored. Like, I don't think the dude does need to pay attention, actually. Anyways, this is getting really a booster.
This is getting a booster seat after this.
Like, I think funny. This is the key to it is that as you are building any environment, and so, we've talked about this in a variety of ways. When I'm a governing body, you are building an environment. When I am in a training session, you are building an environment. When you are hitting in the backyard with your kid, you are creating an environment. All of these things are creating environments for development. And it's important. Yes. If you're a parent, you're just supporting, like, you don't need to go read research papers about these concepts and know every detail. But it is important at this stage of the game with all of the information that we have that the players, the key players in charge of the creation of those environments, whether it is a governing body, whether it is the coaches, whether it is the person training, actually has some foundation of understanding the body and development, and that those principles are being adopted. And so if, kind of to the point of what you're saying, Ashley, if a core principle of a training environment you are in is that the skill should be repeated exactly the same every single time, and that you should continue to take repetitions in a way that ensures that you can repeat the skill exactly the same every time, that should be a big red flag for you, because that is not how the body works. That is not, it's not only not how the body works, it's not how you learn skill. It's not
what the skill is.
It's not what the skill is. There are so many things, which is why we can speak so strongly about drills. And when we say drills, but drills that at their core are saying, we need this drill to make sure that we can get to extension in this exact way every single time in hitting. That just doesn't happen. That literally doesn't happen. The skill, that's not how the athlete's going to learn that movement. That's not going to be something. So that's the core of it. And I think that's the core of some of the like frustration around some of these systems, is that like when that dad last year, or the guy who was helping run the league, said that machine was going to be too easy, I just thought like, oh, well, now I'm like, literally, I just might as well put headphones in for the rest of this meeting, because you are not coming into this conversation with any understanding of the concepts around development. And that part is frustrating, because it's like, you're a decision maker. Right. You are a decision maker. So just when you're thinking about what environments you're putting your kids in these stages and the ultimate goals you're going for, it's just trying to create a system where as many of their decision makers as possible have some key understanding of player development, which is,
I think this is also, Krista, it's not just a young kid thing.
No, absolutely
it's
not.
It's not just
No,
a youth
absolutely
kid
not.
thing. Like at the college level, I was thinking of some specific circumstances this comes up is I definitely think there are times where I'm like, I think we're focusing too much on stability, on being able to hit that drop away 6 times in a row. Like,
Right.
when do you ever call it 6 times in a row at that spot? So like maybe she has been able in training, she has mastered the ability to throw 10 of them in a row. I've never understood the 10 in a row, but like she has mastered the ability to throw 10 in the exact same spot. But that will never be asked of her. So again, it could be used as a foundational concept. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes in training, we'll say like, okay, get her to throw 3 in a row at this spot. And then the next round, now she's got to go 1 in the zone, 2 out of the zone. And what does out of the zone look like? Is it getting someone to chase low? Is it expanding the zone to her arm side a little bit? Is it elevating? And so we are always trying to then understand, do you have the base of stability? It's why we often use, and not often, always use like fastball middle as a major training tool. Because we're like, first throw 5 down the middle. That's your ultimate. Do you have a good foundation base? Now throw your 3 drops to the same spot. Now vary that drop, right? So it's this progression. I also think that comes up a lot. I do think we live at really elite levels training the like make the tasks too stable when the task is not only vary the drop, it's vary the drop, then throw something at someone's eyes, then throw a change up from your arm side, then move to your glove side. I mean, the variability is so high in the task and we don't ever like get there. That happens a lot at the college level. And then the other thing that happens is, command suffers big time. And it always comes back on the pitching coaches. And this is not this has nothing to do with pitching. But then we'll like go back and look at video. And this was a big learning point for me this year. I thought to myself, okay, we're looking at videos and literally in their initial weight shift, like you see knee collapse, which is a huge indicator of loss of single leg stability. And that's a major problem in the pitching motion. And so I think that next year built into our schools that do year-round consulting is that it's just like, we do not miss these like movement quality checks to see what they're looking like stability wise at a certain, because I think basically that get outside the pitching motion, that foundation of stability. We often, when we see an athlete struggling to make adjustments, throw too many balls, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, then we like go to the bullpen. But we need, again, to know like when it's the loss of stability is not just, go fix the motion. It's deeper than that. So I would say those are the 2 major concepts of literally training stability too much. And number 2, which is not understanding the root of the loss of stability, are the 2 worlds where this like stability, variability relationship really come into play at the more elite levels of the game. So this is a concept that I think has huge implications. First of all, Laura, rock star. As you were talking earlier, I'm like, this topic is freaking rock star. So, and you explain it so eloquently. It's one of my favorite things about you. Anyway, so huge implications for the youth, the young kids that like Krista and I are talking about, these 9-year-olds where we're in the corner like, damn, it's like, it's rough to watch. It happens a lot at the high school level, and it often is the reason why their ceiling is getting stuck low. But there are implications for this at the college level as well. So I think that's important to understand that this is like a cross age group, developmental age, chronological age type of concept. Movement variability, movement
it's a human concept.
It's a human concept. It doesn't end after your first period. So I think that's important. Exactly how it plays out looks different based on where you are, but it applies to all.
It's always a good topic when I'm like taking notes. So I just took a couple notes of things that
you're like, I learned from myself today.
Yeah, it just sparked my brain. Yeah, it's good. I learned from myself today. All right. Well, maybe next week we'll have some updates about regionals because we're about to be in softball mania.
About to be in it.
Excited for that. About to be in it. So, all right. Well, I hope you learned something. Hope we made any sense. And until next time.